That'd be living hell. Is you get on some kind of book of the Milton of the Month Club. They send you a whole, oh. All right. There was a couple of Kyroots, if we get to both of them, but one of them was a few nights ago that said that, if I can remember to quote it, how's that? Real thinking never lies. Of course, that was kind of the cheap homeboy neighborhood version, and we'll assume that everyone knows whether it means anything or not, if that I meant something by real. That is, Kyroot did. And so, as opposed to just ordinary thinking. And of course, we'll assume, I think, that the idea of lying, we meant something other than the ordinary run-of-the-mill idea of that word. So let's try a more substantial meal of this and say this, that unpolarized thought never lies. Non-polarized thinking, would you like to hear it, could not lie. Now for a minute, let's just take a lie, I guess in the ordinary sense, without any sense of morality, any religious basis for it, but the idea that at the intellectual level, by deed, word, drawing, the symbolic operations of the human intellect, would say something that in some way it knowingly misrepresented. I guess that about covers lying, doesn't it? Everything from factual information to social information. Yes, I like your hat. Yes, I've always enjoyed your company. That's what people mean by lying. So let's just go with that for a second. If we were dealing with non-polarized thinking, if there is indeed a place in the human brain that you might be able, just off on your own, not through some course, not through drugs, not through praying, meditation, not through any ordinary methods, and not for any particular reason, but that if indeed you could move over somewhere to where your thinking, the actual thought processes, just as they are, more or less, could then move and become active in a way that was not limited to polarized energy, which is the energy that runs everything here from the stars to your liver, to your brain, to the arts, to all the institutions. Everything in the three-dimensional universe is based upon polarized energy. But now, if you could in some way think in a way that was non-polarized, as we were mentioning a few nights ago, could you see that then you would be dealing in thought that was not based on comparisons, is not limited to any form of yes or no, this or that. And on that basis, it would be impossible for that kind of thought, even in the ordinary sense, to lie. To some way have one purpose that it started with, and then in some way get misinterpreted, whether willfully or whether people, whine and say, well, I didn't want to lie, but the social pressure was so great. It would be impossible if the energy being used were not polarized. It would be physically impossible because there would be nothing to lie about. There are no comparisons going on. There is no object in the sense of the movement of human sentences that energy is trying to reach some, that is thought, human thought is trying to reach some conclusion. If it's not based upon comparison, if there are no full conclusions expected, then how? If you can listen to this simultaneously, that we're speaking about energy and even what appears to be, in a sense, philological, linguistical, listening simultaneously, there would be nothing to lie about if you could, if you wanted to. If you're in a whole new landscape, and what you were thinking, as silly as it sounds if you're listening with ordinary brains, that if you're thinking, and there's no point to it, you have no vested interest in what you're thinking, there are no comparisons, you're not attempting to go from, how shall I put this, from point A to point B. Don't you just love it when people can come up, got to raise their mind and come up with, somebody write that down, at least we forget it. How could you lie if you wanted to? How can you misrepresent where you're going if you're not going anywhere? Now back to, as the Kyroots put it, real thinking, and I said non-polarized thinking, cannot lie. Even pointing out in the beginning it had nothing to do with morality, this has nothing to do with encouraging people that if you could think in some new way, you would be free from lying. You wouldn't have to feel guilty. You wouldn't have to lie, to hide lies and whatever it is ordinary people do. You wouldn't have to sit around and wonder, why do I lie? Of course, the answer to that is, do you think? Yes, there you are. But then somebody said, wait a minute, you pulled that crap on us 2 or 3 months ago about you breathe. And I said, yes. And he went, well, there you are. Well, these people down front are getting too smart for this stuff, right? Well, why are you sitting down front? It would be physically, tangibly, chemically, electrically impossible if you were thinking, if the brain was operating in a place that was not institutionally, was not mechanically, was not automatically activated in our time and place, then it would be physically impossible to do what other people call lying. This kind of polarized thought, pick up a piece of some things we were hitting a few nights ago, or at least descriptions. If you were thinking in such a way that it was impossible to lie, in the ordinary sense, and then as far as you can stretch that. It's another way to say that that kind of thinking could not deal in merely incomplete comparisons. Would anyone like to raise the banner again of the oxymoronical obvious? No? All right. At the ordinary level, dealing in a 3D world run by polarized energy, polarized facts, polarized thought, there is no such thing other than incomplete conclusions. As oxymoronical as that may be, who in the city is going to notice? Not me. No, not anybody. All conclusions are incomplete. That's the only reason that people will continue to deal with them. That's the only way that the human secondary world can continue to expand. Because if it did come to a conclusion, somebody'd have to dig up Darwin, remind him of Pope Formosus and that kind of stuff, and drag that man out of the ground, slap him around, and retry him. Because it would all be over. We would all be living with Brother Darwin, or even on Easter Island. You got your choice. That kind of non-polarized thought that could not lie is another way to say that it would not be dealing in just thought that would be dichotomously exclusive. It would not be dealing with any idea, the basic questions always going on with humans, especially in the social affairs, about, well, do you love me or not? Or, now listen, I want to know right now, are you lying to me or are you not lying to me? I want to know, listen, do you know what you're doing or not? Now, especially in science, as they are still want to call it in the city, and they keep trying to expand it because the human intellect continues to expand, to try and turn everything into an inquiry that is based upon dichotomous exclusivity. When non-polarized thought could beat the hell out of that. Not in a way that could be described here. Is that going to stop us? Hell no. All right. Instead of saying, all right, I want to know. How about such things? This is not it. You can poise your pencils, those of you who have poisy pencils. But this is not it, but I was just going to give one way that you could start to glance at it. Instead of the continuing inquiry, instead of this continual, as it's normally called, curiosity, interest, but it's just part of the life breath of the human intellect, of civilization, of this continuing process of saying on an exclusive, on a dichotomously exclusive basis of, well, all right, tell me this. I want to know this, whether you're literally talking to other people, whether you're addressing fate. Instead of that, about tell me, what if it was more on the basis of how To what ends might things be arranged that this would seem to be the limits of the inquiry? How might things be arranged that you wouldn't necessarily, as I said, do this with other people now, but instead of asking somebody that kind of exclusive question, the dichotomously exclusive question, if you could at least non-verbally ask the person, if not yourself, instead of, all right, tell me the truth. Do you think that I'm actually a genius? Or do you think, as I fear, that I'm probably just running around and I'm just on the verge of being like a little Debbie oatmeal cookie that's been mashed up inside the cellophane? Are they about to put me away? Now tell me the truth. What do you think? Instead of addressing life, instead of addressing well, I promised I'd get in a plug for Little Debbie. Worth $100. They spend the big money. If Kyroots can take bribes to work in some unsigned letter from a god, to work in some kind of if the inquiry, if you just take it at sort of an ordinary level instead of continuing to be hampered by the dichotomously based exclusivity inquiries as tell me the truth, tell me this, tell me that you are continually, and I say you, of course, it's the energy running through the intellect at the ordinary level, making you do it, continue to holler, all right, is it door A or door B? Is it true or is it false? Just think for a second. Plenty of you, it should strike you by now, just on your own, there could be interesting little interludes in there. Instead of having to go from a C to a C sharp, as everybody knows, if you know a little bit, they're not only half tones, you can have quarter tones, semi-hemitones. There's always shadings in there somewhere that although it would not be appropriate or useful with ordinary people, and that's not the limits of it, but just consider there are things that you could ask other people, that is, life, yourself, the inquiry, that would not be limited to this kind of dichotomously based exclusivity of tell me this. Is it this or is it that? Is it yes or is it no? There are other things you could say. How did we get to this place? How is it that you seem to be in charge of the information that you're guarding the door of yes or no? Why is it that I seem to be wanting to ask you this? How might things be arranged that there could be a third answer somewhere? And of course then, heaven forbid, there could be a fourth or fifth possibility. You could also look at this kind of non-polarized thinking that could not lie as being the kind of thought that would be trying to deal more with causes instead of explanations. It at least would have a kind of inbred aversion, a disinterest to explanations. Nothing wrong with them. They're hobbies, but that's just everyone else's hobby. That's part of being alive and operative at the ordinary spot inside the nervous system there. If you could deal in that kind of non-polarized thought that could not lie, last time we were here, I used the term not limited to or crippled by anecdotal evidence. May I feel free to improve upon that. How about hobbled by? Because anecdotal evidence does not, of course, cripple anyone in the ordinary world. It, in fact, makes them quite mobile, ambulatory. Even if everyone does have an invisible walker. Well, hey, what do you think polarized thought is? But trying to do something beyond that is what I was referring to about not being crippled by. But even at the ordinary, even anything just beyond the ordinary level, I just wanted to say there's really a better term. Anecdotal evidence does not cripple. And that's not even the point. But it does hobble, if you know what that is. It will restrict motion of hobbling like a horse to keep them from running off and the specifics of trying to train the particular gait. But at least it will keep an animal from absolutely free movement, is what the word hobble is. And anecdotal evidence, even if you're trying to do something a little bit out of the ordinary, it won't necessarily kill you in the same way that telling what kind of guy you are won't kill you. I mean, it makes you smell like you died to some people, but I can't say it'll kill you. But that is the hobbling effect of anecdotal evidence, that you're thinking in such a way. And I repeat again, you should know, with no sarcasm, no attack, but everyone from the popes to the chief rabbi of England, to the president, to everybody. I mean, as serious as they can get. And when they really want to get serious, what do they fall back on? Anecdotal evidence. Scientists. All the world's great thinkers. Whereas, if someone who could think in a non-polarized way, and therefore could not lie, symbolically, and on top of all that crap, wrote a book. And on top of just writing a book, how about this? Wrote their biography, which would, of course, be their autobiography if they had a car. Consider this. We're getting up awfully close to Kyroots. He did one similar to this years ago, or a while back. But you could say that a revolutionist, a non-polarized thinker, would be one who could write his autobiography and offer no anecdotes. Think about it. How could you do it? The original Kyroot was the real revolution would be a man who could write his autobiography and never say I, was the original. This one is just kind of an expanded version. It is kind of an expanded version of pointing out how everyone continually has to tell what kind of guy they are, which is another area of saying what would be possible if you could think in a non-polarized way and therefore couldn't lie, is you would not be limited not only through or hobbled by the anecdotal evidence syndrome, but you also would not be limited to the self-centered sunshine. That is, everything I think is in some way without being able to analyze it. That everything I think is anecdotal. Oh, no, it's not. There are things I know specifically. In fact, let me tell you what happened. I know it's subtle. Now I have to go through all these damn cheap, they get $12.95 for these mail order courses about how to be dramatic and how to be a public speaker to teach you, and then you people just sit there. It's not good to waste money. That was 2 lessons, with this kind of stuff. And learning how to shrug and speak dramatically. Of course, all they said was that cheap. They had a more expensive course, but the cheap one, it just said to be dramatic, it said, talk louder. So. I was just going to pass over this, but I can't resist. Some of you liked for a while the continual talk about telling what kind of guy you are, but then some of you need to be slapped around internally because you took it as being real sarcastic and you took it as being an attack on people and you thought, yeah, the world's full of everybody wants to talk about themselves. In fact, one of my best friends, there was a guy I used to... I just thought of something else. Maybe this will help. There was a movie once, and there was a guy, and he drove everybody crazy in the movie. It was a British comedy. That he said, not that that was the basis of driving everybody crazy, but I'll leave that to your fine discretion. There was this guy that he would say that all he knew was facts. He dealt in no opinions, he had no beliefs. And throughout the movie, he would just pop up. Like he was in a train wreck or something, and he caught a ride on a lorry with a guy carrying produce. And it showed him, he sat down, he said, my name's so-and-so. And he says, I deal only in facts. I have no opinions, I have no views, but I deal only in facts. And then went away to other scenes, and it came back, you could tell they showed road signs. It was like 3 hours later, and this poor farmer sitting there, and he was looking like, he's going crazy. Because the guy's just sitting there doing things. Did you realize that John Milton's father was, and it's just one after another, number of facts. The reason I stopped to do that was not to plug the British film industry. But it was I'm sure to ordinary people that care for that kind of humor at all, it's funny. But if you ask people, why are you laughing at that? The guy is just relating. You did follow it. I didn't go through all the details, but it was just one factor or another. He said, you do realize that Shakespeare died in the fall of 1616, whereas originally they thought, in some cases, it had been reported that he died in April. And he'd pause just for a second. Then he'd just look off, and it was just completely unconnected. Then he would come in with something about architecture. He'd jump from century to century. There seemed to be no connection. It was just like he was just full of facts, and he smiled, and he was friendly, and just to pass the time with anybody he was around for a few seconds, people on the street. He'd be standing at a traffic light, waiting to cross, and he'd turn to somebody, and he'd say, do you realize, and sometimes it seemed to have some connection, he'd say, the traffic light reminds me, do you realize that when the Romans were here first in the British Isles, approximately, and they'd give the date, what I was getting at was what would be, from an ordinary view, the alternative to dealing in anecdotal evidence. What would be the alternative from an ordinary view if an ordinary mind would even tolerate this and listen and thought, well, all right, is there some boon to be had that if I, or at least could understand, if I knew what you were pointing out about people continually talk in a way in which all information is self-centered, that it is all anecdotal, that everybody, no matter what information they apparently are conveying, are also telling you what kind of guy they are. All right, if there is something to that, then what would be the alternative? And what could they come up with? Is what brought that to mind. Well, that and the British film industry sent me $100 to give them a plug. Would that not, think about yourself for a second, would that not be about the alternative from any ordinary view, that if indeed I had some kind, if I could get a grip on what it sounds like you're talking about, that if I could deal in non-personally based, and don't take that as, remember, as some kind of ordinary knock on egotism or egoism. But if I in some way could just deal in factual information and I did not color it at all, that I personally, for good or ill, but that I personally did not become involved with it, then what would be left? And I suggest to you, it would almost be that character in that movie who, properly so in the movie, drove everyone that got close to him absolutely bonkers. They were ready to kill him. He was just as nice and polite, friendly, and just full of more facts than anybody in the world would want to know. And even would preface by saying, we have a little time here to chat. If let me tell you, first off, I deal in facts. I have no opinions. I have no beliefs. I have no particular view on any of this. But so I just wanted to mention that. And he'd just start. Do you realize that Attila the Hun was not the barbarian that they said he was? Did you know that? At first, people kind of smile. Could you, taking that, I'm not saying that that's the only possible way to describe it, but it is a tailor-made, ready-made example. What would be an alternative? If you could, if you saw some reason to, or if you just theoretically, for hearing this discussed, if you tried to imagine what would be if I could get my hand on it some way theoretically, or what it is of always, at least, in an ancillary sense, conveying what kind of guy I am, along with the information, along with the facts. If I could extract that, what would be left? Almost nothing. It is not the way that the human mind ordinarily operates. It's not the way that life operates. There would be no benefit to it. You'd just be a caricature like this guy in the movie. So that's not the point. Not with ordinary people. There's nothing wrong. But the movie, without them understanding why, just made a perfect example of somebody in a sense that had extracted anecdotal evidence that in a sense had quit or never did or whatever, ever conveyed what kind of guy they were. Other than the fact, of course, he already did by saying, I'm the kind of guy that don't ever say what kind of guy I am. I'm the kind of guy that has no opinions, I only deal in facts. And it would just be intolerable, which is not the point again. It is that it is not functional, it is not necessary, and therefore it does not happen. Or if it happened, they'd put the guy away. He would not be ordinarily civilized. He would not be socially acceptable. Just simply nobody, as was shown in the movie. No one could stand to be around the man over about 5 or 10 minutes. So where does that leave you? Well, it was about 15 miles outside of Liverpool. No. Back to the main road, if you were dealing in a kind of thought that was not limited to comparisons, not based upon simply the physical whole of polarized neural energy, let me just leave this one part and point out Nothing to do with religion, nothing to do with morality. But if you could do that, there is no longer any physical, there is no longer any real validity or meaning to any concept of truth or lies. Because they're simply two names of positive and negative, North Pole and South Pole, of the polarized energy. And so it would no longer be any validity. And it's got nothing to do with, in some way, which some of you surely have read enough, old ideas constantly throughout hocus pocus, mumbo jumbo, mystical literature throughout the ages of that men in some way would eat secret mushrooms or take a secret mail order course, which was hard to do back 600 BC, but some of them tried to get these courses where in some way you could rise above the mere mundane confines of morality. History, if not full, is full enough of guys here and there that said, well, I in some way have had a mystical experience, either that or I hurt myself. And I'm now able to rise above the constraints of you mere mortals, the rest of you peons. I'm no longer subject to the ideas of good and evil, which, to really go off on a sidetrack, those of you who don't know, it was normally men who couldn't get laid. There are men who married too early, all those kind of guys, if you don't know it, and I assume none of you are watching, or if you are, don't take it personally, or if you do, don't write me, because but the kind of people that always, yes, I'm going to rise above, because it is my cosmic duty. The fates have selected me. And it's simply a guy that's wanting to have more than one woman at one time, or he's wanting to do something. He's wanting to dress up like a nun and go out and fool around at the bus station. That's not what I'm saying, but notice that arose from this. It's not a knock on ordinary morality, whether it be sexual or otherwise, because that is a necessary part of the growth, the civilization process of humanity. But what I'm telling you now is the reality behind it. From outside the 3D world, from the near 5D view, there is a reality to that, and it's got nothing to do with morality. It is simply this, that there is, or else the three-dimensional view wouldn't even be operable. But there is a place beyond that, that's behind it, that's above it, that the idea of true or false is invalid. That's just two possibilities. And it's just invalid. And so the idea that I was presenting originally, that if you can get outside of polarized thought, not theoretically, not on any basis of morality or mysticism, but you can actually get the brain operating in a place that is not limited to polarized energy. The whole idea, it's not theoretical. You don't sit and think, well, wait a minute, now I'm so smart, I am so insightful that I do not have to deal in those little cheap-ass ideas of true and false or good. You don't think that. You're just simply thinking in another place where it is inoperative. The question doesn't arise. Now, I don't mean between you and dealing with other people. That's not the point. It's in here. As you don't have thoughts and think, wait a minute, am I having a thought that's telling me the truth, or am I having one of those naughty thoughts that are lying to me? The question no longer arises in that area. It doesn't exist over there because you're not dealing with polarized energy. If you could think in a place where there was not operating on polarized energy, if you were in a place that we could say neurally, or at least I was suggesting that you might be able to start all over again, then all the methods that life uses to keep score of the civilization game, which is what true and false and right and wrong are, they're the concepts, they're the scoreboard that men measure, that life makes them use to measure, to keep score of how the game's going. If you get over to a place like you start all over, it's not that the scores are right or wrong, they're simply outdated. It's got nothing to do with the new game. It's got nothing to do with the new operations that you can think in a way that there is no question of true and false. Now that I've gone this far, I almost wish, theoretically, what the hell do we care what you think? I wasn't saying that personally. This is part of the act. It's part of the show. I've almost got to the place tonight, now I've done this, that I wish I had not even changed the original of Kyroots, that real thinking never lies. We should have just done that and just stopped the tape and let it go, because that wraps it up. Think about it. I just didn't want it to. I'm not saying that I, see personally. Still part of the act. To think, well, for somebody to say real thinking never lies, that infers that my thinking is not real. I like people that can grab an inference right away and realize it. Except now it's still an act. I'm being silly because ordinary people can't do that. They might be able to say that, but are they going to say that in an impersonal manner? Not on your friggin' life. They will be mad. Wait a minute. If you're saying real thinking never lies, I'm not a dummy. You're inferring that what ordinary thought goes on, what ordinary people do, is not real thought. Huh? That's what you're inferring, right? And what if I kind of shrugged? Or what if I did nothing? Their whole question is already polarized. Now, wait a minute. You mean I showed up for this program I turned on, I was watching some tape, and a man says, real thinking never lies. A good thinking, ordinary person would be quite well suited, be quite expected to be offended already. Because whoever the hell this is saying this, he obviously means something. He's insinuating that I'm not up to speed. He's insinuating that what I think, whatever the hell he means, is not real. Now you see why, speaking theoretically and theatrically, why I wish I hadn't even changed it now. Real thinking never lies. Okay. Ordinary thinking, how about this? Always lies. You like it that way? All right, you like it this way. Ordinary thinking lies half the time. Remember, literally, the brain, is made up of half of what you know and believe, and the other half is what you don't believe in and what you don't know. So, ordinary thinking always lies. Or, ordinary thinking lies half the time. Or, half the time, when the ordinary mind is telling the truth, it's lying. You understand? Half of its truth is untrue. There's no way out. So you could say, well, that's not real thinking. If you're an ordinary person and you got past the last 5 minutes and decided to, I'll go with the flow. What the hell? then you might say, wait a minute. If you're ordinary, you might say, well, that is good. Because the rest of this stuff is not real thought, because it can get all confused. And every time somebody has a thought and they stand up and say, well, here's my thought of what's true, then half the world, more or less, that's paying attention will stand up and say, we're with him. And the half that didn't stand up, don't be a dummy. Are you going to have to wait and say, well, are you people's pants stuck to the seat? Not hardly. Are you going to have to say, wait a minute, does that mean that the half of the people here on this planet that didn't stand up in agreement to this splendid, obviously correct idea, does that mean in any way, dare I say it, does that mean that maybe some percentage of you have some doubt? Save your breath, Bunky. Half the people are not going to believe it. If it's got any life, if it has any legs at all, if that show is going to play, no matter how truthful it is to you, and they say, all right, who believes this new piece of information? Who believes this is true? Expect half the world to stand up. Half the audience, whoever's attention you have that's interested in the matter. Expect half of them to stand up. Half of them will not stand up. If they all stand up, you're not going anywhere. If they all sit there, you're not going anywhere. If it is going to be, if you don't like the inside showbiz talk, or if the idea has legs, I can be up to date. If it's viable, if it's viable, half the people are going to stand up and half the people will not stand up. And as I said, you don't have to check whether half the people sitting down didn't hear you, or whether they don't feel good. You don't have to check. Half the people do not believe anything. Half of your brain does not believe what the other half believes. That is polarized thought. There was another Kyroot from a few nights ago. Do you remember this one? It said that ordinary thinking can only believe in that which it cannot see. Since it doesn't cost more, should I point out the obvious? That if we were ordinary people, that is not the punchline to the one sentence, well, not the punch ending that you would expect. what you'd expect if it's going to make any sense at all is that ordinary intelligence, ordinary thought, can only believe in that which it can see. You can preach a sermon from there, attack humanity, kick history around. Just say, well, that's just like ordinary people. That's just like ordinary thinking. People say, well, I didn't see it. I don't believe it. They didn't send men to the moon. Yeah, I know all about that. I wasn't there. Oh, they showed on TV. But hell, they got little puppets that talk. They got frogs that sing. They don't fool me. I didn't see it. No. Boy, is that outdated. Well, 3,000 or 4,000 years. Ordinary thinking can only believe in that which it can't see. They're just as wrong as they can be. In our little foolish, metaphorical way. We consider, regardless of all the criticism that has been going on, it's right up to date now, that part of life's body that criticizes the other parts are right up to date with contemporary statistics, language, but these kinds of criticism of humanity being and remaining, being far too superstitious, being held far too smugly and firmly by the creaky old ideas of religious dogma, which would be all of that, believing in things that you can't see. Right? Come on. That is not it. Because regardless of that kind of criticism, and probably half the people hearing this would join right in and say, that's true. No offense to religion, but that's true. We got to get past this thing about worrying about all these spirits and spooky ideas of conflicting gods and religions. We got to get down and deal with life as it is. That is not the way the intellect is based, and that is not the way it continues to work. Because regardless of that kind of criticism, which you can take a very good solid view on the other side of the room of those sitting down or standing up, saying that's true, that man is far too superstitious and held by beliefs in things that he cannot see. Look at it this way. A better operational view would be like this, that inasmuch as the ordinary intellect runs on polarized, inconclusive energies, then this, that is, being held by superstitions and beliefs, the ordinary intelligence now, remember we're still there for a second, that is its natural present state. There is no room, not from any profitable view, to attack humanity. That people are still too dumb. They're still too held by foolish, primitive religious beliefs, well, like in God, that there's a God somewhere that cares about you, paying any attention to what's going on, that is just completely silly. Nobody's ever seen him or believing in worrying about life after death. Come on. Be a humanistic, concerned citizen. You got to take care of this planet. You got to take care of life and blah, blah, blah. It's not religious foolishness. It is not antiquated dogma. It is the energy that runs the polarized mind of man. In that, it's good that we run a tape right then when it gets real good and tricky, right? Viscid. I'm glad the Rolling Stones didn't see that. That's the ordinary view that people do too much believe in what they can't see. But that's not what I'm getting at. They're seeing just as they should. They're believing just as they should. Not that everybody should believe in any particular religion, but insofar as there being some operationally useful attack on humanity still being held too much by beliefs in things they can't see, it's not so. That is the nature, that is the predictable, that is the inescapable outcome of the polarized operations of the old thinking, of ordinary thinking. It could not do otherwise. Now let's change it. For those of you really getting confused, I trust, I have faith in being able to see everyone confused, even more so right at the last minute. It is that the ordinary intellect can only believe in that which you cannot see. And I just tried to kind of run it backwards and show you that any kind of ordinary attack on that is improper. But now back to where we were going. Where are we going? It would only be non-polarized thought that could do this. That could believe in, to use that term, that could believe in that which it can plainly see. That's it. I do wish that they'd send me the rest of that course so I could get in. They promised real good theatrical sarcasm and cynicism. I think some of it, it's just my suspicion. I hadn't gotten all the lessons yet, but that some of it's going to be lifted from Milton. The copyrights run out, and they figure, we're so dumb, what do we know anybody to spend, send off for a $12.95, be the world's greatest speaker course. But consider, would it not be somebody extraordinary that could believe in what is plainly obvious? Think about it. Well, you can't think about it. You either hear it or you don't. We've been talking about this kind of stuff already. But notice, at the ordinary level, we're not talking about other people, we're talking about everybody's intelligence, including yours at the ordinary level. What is the one things it cannot believe in? The things. That which is just patently obvious from quite simple view. Why is this man a drunk? Well, as a matter of fact, I could speculate, but in his case, as a matter of fact, I have been treating this man. I have statistical information to speak in general before I get specific about him. To speak more in general about the statistical demographics of the area from which he arose and his social economic background, but I know you were asking specifically. Specifically, I happen to know because my father was also a psychiatrist, and my father happened to treat his father, and his father was a drunk. His father mistreated. All right, that's not right or wrong. That is the factual operations of the polarized energy at ordinary level. How about this? I'm not saying it's not one is right and one is wrong, but what could not the ordinary intellect of a fully functioning, sophisticated, up-to-date human intellect face if you said, why is that man a drunk? How come the answer never comes out? Because he drinks too much. Now, years ago, somebody could have said that even. Now, I'm not saying that's the right answer, but notice nowadays, that's not, it's worse than the wrong answer. It's just not, it's not proper. I mean, it's dysfunctional. That is no answer. But from one view, it is an answer. What happens when people die? Well, it so happened I'm not only a psychiatrist, I did my minor in theology. Well, we can go into that and about, there are certain views, although I did go to a Christian university, and I'll be glad to speak to you on some of the ideas of not just Orthodox mainline Christianity, but even some of the Russian Orthodox. And plus I can get in. I happen to have done my minor in Islam. We can do that, or you can say, what happens to somebody when they die? And you can say, well, they don't ever get back up. You never hear from them again. Or you can also do this. You can say, I don't know. And you could also be this clear. And suddenly when a rabbi or a priest or a man who looked like he went to a seminary slips up and he says, the other obvious thing, they say, what happens when somebody dies? And you say, I don't know. And that guy comes up to you, and instead of aluminum siding, he has some facts to present to you like, well, it's good that I'm here because I can help you. I am a Jewish scholar. I am a Hindu scholar. And it's good. I mean, you just admit you don't know what happens. All right, here's another chance to be plainly and obvious. Not sarcastic, and you wouldn't do this, but listen. The other one would be the guy shows up, and not a guy, parts of life's body, the institutions of religion says, well, you don't know? Well, it's good we're here to help you. And you say, do you know? Now, of course, if you could do this, in other words, make them tell the truth, that is, operate on a non-polarized thought basis, that you already said to the question, what happens when you die? As opposed to the polarized answers, such as, well, you go to paradise, or you go to Cleveland, or to hell, or whatever, that if you said, I don't know, and then life comes up and say, well, how fortunate that we're here to help. And you say, why? Do you know? And if you could have the same effect on them that you just had on you, that you responded in a non-polarized way, that, hey, I don't know. And they say, well, it's good we're here. And you say, do you know? And they'd go, nope. We're completely out of tape, I assume. Yeah. Bye.